writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business, coming to you from Kobo's headquarters in Toronto.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. I'm Stephanie, and today Laura is joining me.
Hi everyone.
And in today's episode, we're sitting and talking to author Lauren Layne. And if you don't know who Lauren is a New York Times and US Today bestselling author of more than 24 romantic comedies. Her books have sold over 1 million copies in 9 languages, and her work has been featured in Publisher Weekly, Glamour, The Wall Street Journal, and Inside Edition. She's also based in New York. Fun fact.
In this episode, we talked to Lauren about the process behind creating her brand aesthetic, which we love, and what apps and programs she uses to create her social media posts.
So if you're wondering what exactly an author brand is, I would encourage you to look at Lauren's Pinterest and Instagram just to see what a cohesive author look could be on all these platforms. So we'll let Lauren tell us more. So without further ado, here's the interview. Thank you, Lauren, for joining us on the Kobo Writing Life podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell our listeners a bit about you and your writing journey?
Sure. So I'm a contemporary romance author. I wrote my first book in 2011 and got my agent in 2012 and first book in 2013. So that's 5-ish years now. And I've written probably 30 books since then. It's a lot. It was sort of a very fast, very intense journey. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind and I just love it. Like I honestly can't imagine doing anything else.
Can you tell us a bit about what a typical day looks like for you?
Yes. So people always cringe when I say this, but I am a super early riser. So I get up pretty much every day at 5 a.m. Unless I'm kind of out of my routine, then it's maybe 7. I find I do my best work in the morning, especially my writing. That's always the first thing I do. I like to say do the hard stuff first, and sometimes that is writing. So I usually do that. I don't have kids is the other thing that I'll mention. So I know that people with kids are always like, how do you do that? I'm like, well, I just have the dog. But it's nice because it allows me to basically write from maybe 5, 6 a.m. all the way to 2 o'clock. And that's usually about when my creative energy, when I'll switch over and I'll do some of the business stuff like email or, talk with my agent or graphics or website updates, that kind of thing.
Did you always wake up at 5 a.m. or did you have to train yourself?
No, I don't really know what happened because my husband is the same way. He wakes up early. And when I was a teenager, I totally did the sleep till 11 as late as my mom would let me. And same thing at college. I always slept in. And definitely when I used to work in my day job, so to speak, I was one I would snooze until the last minute. So I think it came about really once I started writing and it sounds so cheesy, but when you love your job, I can't wait to get started. So I guess I trained myself.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be a morning person.
We need to learn from you.
I do drink a lot of coffee. I will say that.
I mean, I could add more to my daily 1 cup. So they can see that you publish a lot of titles in a single year, maybe more so than many authors. Usually sometimes it's only 1 book a year. So how do you manage your time between writing and then also promoting your new titles? Because I feel like you'd be a planner, either monthly, weekly, or yearly. How do you go about your publishing schedule?
I am a big time planner. So the one thing I will note is I do have a lot of books, but actually they tend to get planned a year or so in advance. So the stuff that I'm working on now is actually contracts I signed in 2017, maybe early 2018. So a lot of that is just sort of something that I committed to back then, and it's very structured. But I always it's pretty simple for me. I keep the writing first, and if I'm behind on deadline, then no promo happens. If I'm sort of on top of things, then, I'll try to do some graphics or get on Instagram. But for the most part, for me, I never really try to balance those things. I just write until I absolutely can't write anymore or until I'm done writing. And then whatever's left over, I switch and I do the promo.
Do you have any apps or programs that you use to organize your schedule, or you just?
I do. So I live in New York City and it's tiny. But one thing I keep going back to is the paper planner. I have to have it. So I use the paper planner to really track what I'm doing each hour. That's huge for me. I'm forever trying to keep track of how I'm spending time. And then in terms of apps, it's so tiny and it's cheap. There's a little thing called Chime. And it basically just dings every single hour and lets me know, the top of the hour. And then I'm like, oh, it's 10 o'clock and you've done nothing. It's time to get to work.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah.
So being traditionally published, how much of your own marketing do you take on yourself compared to what your publisher does?
Well, that's a great question. Part of the reason that I went with traditional publishing in the first place was really because I wanted to make sure that I could focus on the writing. So my perspective is honestly, traditional publishers they're earning some of the royalties, right? Like they make a fair amount. So I figure I do the writing and they do all of the promotion, which in reality, I do some on my own. And the way I sort of try to approach it is I'll take responsibility for reaching my current reader base. So I have my newsletter and Instagram. My assistant will help post things on Facebook. But in terms of the reaching new readers and like the advertising and sort of the more, we'll say, innovative strategies, that's something that I really look to them to cover as much as possible.
Do you think it's necessary for authors to have kind of their own marketing strategies in place?
I do, and not to be completely contradictory to what I just said about thinking that publishers should do it. Even if you're traditionally published, I am a huge fan of at least, even if it's just bullet points and sort of what your strategy is. But the one thing I do think that a lot of authors maybe are limiting themselves on is they focus so much on the new release or the release that's just coming up or the book that's on sale. And of course, that should be a huge part of it. We want to promote what's new and fancy and the sort of fresh material. But I think sometimes we forget that like we make as much per book as something that released a year ago as the book that's coming out tomorrow. So don't forget about that backlist. Honestly, the reason that I'm able to make a living on this at all is because of the books that I've written before. And the new releases really are just sort of a bonus. So definitely, yes, you need a marketing plan. And yes, it should include, your backlist and branding. And if you want to do a blog and really sort of helping establish who you are as a whole and not just that new release.
That's a great point.
Never forget.
Yeah, don't forget your backlist. Good point.
So I've been reading your books since 2014. And one of the first things I did after reading them was join your newsletter. So I was updated on all your coming titles. And then I've seen its many iterations over the years. You had it, I think, weekly, which I enjoyed on my commute to work. But you've slowly simplified your focus, basically, and you've chosen Instagram and Pinterest. So can you just talk about your decision to focus on these two platforms rather than everything? Because there's so many social media platforms out there. I think it's hard for an author to pick which one because I think they need to be on all of them.
Yes. So it was a weird decision. And I say weird only because most authors aren't doing it. But so in May 2018, so a little less than a year ago, I actually quit Facebook and Twitter, which is, again, sort of unheard of for authors. And I did it very cold turkey. I didn't really plan it. It was kind of an instinctive gut reaction. It ended up sort of being for the best, as weird as it was and sort of as scary and unusual. And I found really that once I did that, it just gave me a lot more, I guess, creative freedom to sort of think of other ways of reaching readers. Whereas everybody's on Facebook and everybody's doing Facebook parties and Facebook groups and fan groups. Or there's just so many things. And it sort of felt a little bit like noise to me. And I thought, okay, what if I took a step back from that, because it was never really a natural fit for me anyway, and tried something a little bit new and a little bit different. And, I'm sure it's not without its costs. There are a lot of people on Facebook that aren't on Instagram. And I'm very aware that I'm no longer able to personally connect with them. But ultimately, it really does just it gives me a chance to focus and I think create a more specific strategy that I wouldn't have if I was trying to do all the things at once.
So I find Instagram and Pinterest are very image heavy, and that's kind of a hard thing to do when you're trying to promote a book. But how have you made these platforms work for you? Because I was reading your blog and you mentioned that you have like a specific format that you pick for Instagram, and then you've found the way to help with Pinterest to get readers to your titles.
Yes. So Instagram, really my biggest suggestion there is always that people like pretty things on Instagram. I think a lot of authors treat it sort of as almost like an extension or alternative to Facebook. And it can be, but really if you want to grow there, and I think especially not just looking at your number of followers, but if you want to have people sort of engage with you and consistently like your photos and reply to your stories, they do need to be visually appealing. So I've shifted a little bit around. I try different things. I do black and white photos. I'll do all black. I'll do all white. I'll do a checkerboard, just so I myself don't get bored. But I find that sort of gives it a visual appeal that really does bring in new readers. And I think the coolest thing there is that if you do have basically a pretty Instagram feed, you're going to reach people that maybe haven't heard of you. And it's not just about reaching, that Goodreads crew that read your book and now wants your updates. You can kind of reach a whole other set of followers. And I get people all the time like, oh, I love your feed. And, I went and bought one of your books, and they're not even normally a romance reader. So it's sort of a cool opportunity. Awesome. Yeah. It's really kind of the holy grail of social media.
Yeah. Do you have any encouraging words or tips for authors afraid to know where they're focused on social media? Because I know a lot of them, they think Facebook is like the top priority most of the time. But anything you think, advice that an author should know to not be afraid to branch out?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say, I'll be really candid that it is sort of scary. And even me, like, I know this was such a great decision for me. I've never been happier. My career feels like it's more focused than ever. But even that being said, I still sometimes have these moments of like, oh my gosh, am I sabotaging everything by not being on Facebook? Because Facebook just is so ubiquitous and everybody seems to be there. But I would say if you like Facebook, be on Facebook. I think that's really the biggest tip that I can give is sort of go with what feels natural to you. And that might be Twitter. I mean, I felt like this really old stilted weirdo when I was on Twitter, and same thing with Facebook. Like it's just was never sort of my cup of tea, and I think people maybe can sense that a little bit. Similarly, I can tell when maybe an author doesn't really love Instagram. You can tell she doesn't really know how to use it. She's just putting up any old picture, and I want to tell them like, you don't have to be on Instagram if you don't love it. So not to get too woo woo, but really go with what you enjoy. And for some people that is all platforms. I see authors all the time that are just killing it, and they're on Twitter and Snapchat and YouTube, and they've got everything going on, and power to them. So really just be honest with yourself, and also be okay, breaking the rules a little bit or just doing what makes you happy. Because I think that's why we got into this career in the first place is it's our dream job. And if you're miserable, then I think you're missing out a little bit on why you started.
People can tell if you're,
yeah. I really think so.
This is just a nosy question, but do you notice on like Instagram that there's like younger people maybe finding your books compared to like Pinterest, let's say?
I will say that Instagram and Pinterest both compared to Facebook skew much younger. So there is something to be said for watching demographics a little bit, and at least even if you're not targeting a certain age group, sort of being aware of who you're talking to. In terms of Instagram versus Pinterest, not really. They're both overwhelmingly female. I do find it interesting on Instagram, and this is kind of just anecdotal as best I can tell from profile pictures. I don't have full data. I've noticed that younger Instagram users tend to respond more to my stories. Like I'll get a lot of replies there, whereas I think maybe the slightly older set of Instagram users, and there are plenty, they seem to be more engaged on like the actual posts, like the grid default. That's just my observation, but I found that interesting. I don't know if it's because it's more like Snapchat, the story features, and Snapchat's for the young, cool kids. I don't know.
Am I old because I don't respond to Instagram stories?
They have those reactions now and filters. There's so much going on.
Should I be doing?
Also, I don't understand.
Okay.
So one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because you kind of have this really cool handle on your author branding. I feel like you have a great example of what branding for an author could be like throughout your Instagram look, and you kind of have the same look on your website as well. What do you define as an author brand, and how did you decide on what the Lauren Layne brand aesthetic should look like?
Well, first of all, thank you. But in terms of what an author brand is, this took me a long time to figure out, because when I was first starting out, I had maybe 1 or 2 books out, and they didn't sell well. In fact, they more or less bombed. And one of the things about author brand is I don't know that people exactly understand what that is. And I think a lot of people, and this also applies to publishers, I think a lot of people think your author brand is how big you are, so how many followers you have, and like, oh, your brand needs to grow. It is not a numbers game. Brand is really something, it's sort of more who you are. And the way I always describe it is basically the vibe you give off. So if you go to a signing or a book panel, and imagine engaging with readers, when they walk away and describe you to their friends, or tell their mom about you, are they gonna be like, oh, she's so friendly, or she's so goofy, or she's so cool, or she was so blunt, or swears like a sailor? All of those things, they really do. That combined with sort of the vibe of your books, because there usually is some overlap, that I think is really what an author brand is. And then in terms of brand aesthetic or branding, however you want to describe it, that really is just, again, I keep using the phrase, the pretty stuff, but it is the pretty stuff. It's the colors that you use. It's the type of images that you gravitate towards. It's whether you use like all lowercase friendly fonts or you use bold caps, and all of that to an extent, I think, should be a reflection of who you are, because it tells people sort of your story. Like, are you the bold caps girl, or are you like the lowercase fun hot pink girl? And you can be all of the above, but I think starting to get consistent with that is very important for authors, especially as they grow.
And you were saying that you were on a publisher call, then it cut out?
Yes. Oh, sorry. So yeah, my publisher call, one of the things that they started out saying was, you need to grow your brand. And I was like, what does that mean? They're like, well, you don't have that many Facebook followers. And I didn't. Like, I'd only had one book out. I maybe had 600 Facebook followers. I'm not sure. And it threw me for a loop, honestly, probably for years, because I kept thinking, I even wrote this semi-angry blog post at the time. And it was basically like, I am not a brand, because it is like when they try to put a number on your brand and how big it is, then you start measuring your self-worth as an author as whatever that level of reach is, or, my brand is that I have 20,000 Facebook followers, and that's not it at all. I know plenty of authors who have 30,000 Facebook followers, but they don't get that much engagement, and that's because their brand isn't that strong. And then I'll see other, maybe more debut authors that get a ton of engagement. They're putting out a brand, they're consistent, the readers know what to expect from this person, and they want to know this person. So really don't underestimate sort of the consistency and authenticity factor, and definitely pay attention to that rather than numbers, especially when you're just starting out.
That's really good advice. And as far as like your images that you have, is there a team behind kind of like the look that you have across platforms and your website?
So my book covers themselves are 100% my publisher. So again, I'm traditionally published, so I sadly don't get to do my own covers. I would love to. But in terms of my website and everything that you see on Pinterest and Instagram is only me. And I'm actually very picky about my graphics. So sometimes I'll get behind and my assistant's like, I can help. And I'm like, no, they're mine. So yeah, that's honestly, it's one of my favorite things to do. I don't let myself do it until I hit my word count. But I love at the end of the day, sometimes I'll get a glass of wine and, a list of graphics I need to create, and I just kind of go to town.
It looks great. It kind of has like a Gossip Girl, like New York vibe. I really like all the black and white.
Thanks.
So how can an author find or create their own branding? And do you kind of have any platforms or tools that you recommend for editing photos?
Yes. So in terms of finding your branding, because I know it can be really overwhelming. Like someone just says like, go find your fonts and colors. And if you don't have any design experience or web experience, you're like, what does that mean? So again, I always point people towards Pinterest.
Love that place.
I do. Like I could spend hours. I do spend hours. But you just like, even if it's a secret board just for you, save any pictures that jump out. So if it's flowers that you like, or like a beach scene or a cityscape, and you will eventually start to notice that you gravitate towards certain things. Like either it'll be sort of like cozy pictures, or you'll like, in my case, I like the more glamorous, sort of like New York City lifestyle pictures. So start paying attention to that, and you'll get a sense really of where you want to go with your branding. In terms of tools, if at all possible, if you are brand new to this and you want some sort of consistency, I'd actually recommend hiring a brand designer. If you can't yet afford a full website, because I know those are pricey, you can find a brand designer for much less than you can a web designer, and they will actually put together like a branding kit for you. So you can give them your Pinterest board and they'll say, okay, here's your color palettes, and they'll have what's called the hex code, which you'll need if you want to design any of your own graphics. And then they'll give you the fonts and the styles. And then what you can do with that is take it to one of my most recommended tools, which is canva.com. And it's a free tool. They also have a business plan, which I'd recommend. But really within Canva, you can set up templates that then have those same colors and the same fonts that the branding person created for you. And that way you can do it yourself. So, you're not spending an arm and a leg getting these fancy graphics, but they will at least start to look consistent because you have these sort of common branding elements.
So all the images you post on Pinterest are created by you?
Yes. Yeah, I do most of them on Canva. I do, I'll be honest, use Photoshop for some of the fancier ones.
Mm-hmm.
The Photoshop is super complicated. So unless, I don't honestly recommend it. I was one of those kids that when I was probably like 9 or 10, and this was back in probably 1990. My dad came home with like an early version of Photoshop and handed it to me, and he was like, "This is the future. Learn it." And I had no idea.
Wrong.
He wasn't wrong, and it kind of kills me. And he made me learn to type too. And honestly, I'm not great with Photoshop, but that really did probably give me a head start that helps. If you're just starting out, I don't listen to anyone that says, "Oh, you have to have Photoshop," because it is hard, it's complicated.
It's expensive.
It's expensive, yeah.
It's a
So
little
truly
overwhelming.
just use Canva. Like that's my go-to, and I can create it so much faster than I can Photoshop.
I will check that out.
Yeah. And is there an app that you recommend, or do you use an app for Instagram as well? Like I know some people use them to lay out like their grid and get the look before they actually upload.
Yes, I am a huge fan. I've tried a few of them and they're all good, but I'm a huge fan of Planoly, and I think that's how you say it. And it is phenomenal because not only can you upload all of your images for Instagram ahead of time and you can drag and drop so you see what they look like, but in the past couple of months, they actually will let you auto schedule. So I'm a little behind now, but for November and December, I had my entire grid planned, every post for every single day, like 30 days in advance. And, I'll swap them out. Like if something fun happens that day and I want it to actually be like a daily update, then I'll swap out the image for whatever my pre-planned one was. But it really takes a lot of the sort of the pressure off Instagram. So then you can really focus on making it pretty and making it fun, and you can batch it up and do it while watching Gossip Girl reruns on a Saturday night. It's not like you have to worry about it every single day. So Planoly is definitely the way to go.
Awesome.
Have you used that one, Laura?
Yeah, that's what we use for the KWL Instagram actually.
It honestly was such a game changer for me. I didn't even know that they made those type of things because it's called Instagram. So I thought you had to do everything like instantly.
Yeah.
I'm always like impressed by things that schedule.
Such a game changer for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you had an assistant. We just interviewed a virtual assistant last week, and I was just wondering how do you use a virtual assistant? Do you have them help you out with something specific so you have more time to write, or do they just maybe plan out your schedule?
She honestly, I don't use her as well as I should because she's phenomenal and she's forever sending me like emails and texts like, can I help you with something? She was doing, when I was on Facebook, the biggest thing that she did was really helping manage that Facebook persona for me because I didn't love it. And she does still manage a Facebook group. So all of my messaging says Lauren Layne is not on Facebook, but there is a reader group, and she'll always go in and sort of facilitate that, make sure everyone's playing nice. And she'll also post, sales and relevant Lauren Layne news for me there. She also, I'll give her my manuscripts when they're finished, and she'll oftentimes go through and like pull out sort of like the catchy parts that we can use for teasers. Because for some reason, that's my least favorite part is having to go back and reread my own stuff and figure out like where the fun bits are. She'll sort of like build a whole spreadsheet for me on that. She does the same thing once we start getting reviews. I have a very firm, I don't read any reviews policy. So she'll go in and do that for me and basically find all the nice ones that we can then use sort of on promo graphics. And then she also, it's wonderful, she puts them all into a Google Sheet for me. And if I'm ever having a bad day or someone gets under my skin, she sends me a link and it's basically all nice Lauren Layne stuff. So it's really stuff like that. And she does my ultimate least favorite task in the world, which is mailing.
Oh.
So I live in the middle of Manhattan and there's, 8 million people that live here, and we don't have that many post offices. So, and we have to carry our books because we don't have cars in New York. So if I ever want to mail a book and I don't have any room in my apartment, so all my books, like my own Lauren Layne books, are stored under the bed. So I had to go get the book from under the bed, carry it to the post office, which is like 8 blocks away, or try to find a cab. And it was just miserable. So now I literally get my author copies. I keep one for myself, one for my sister, and I send the rest to Lisa, and she manages all of that for me, which is great.
Lisa's a hero.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm surprised the post office is so bad in New York.
Yeah.
I think it really, just because real estate is so expensive here, and so every space is tiny, and it's like anything, even just going to the grocery store or like the CVS, the drugstore here, it'll be tiny, and you're like, where are the tampons? And they're like one tiny shelf and like 10 women like waiting in line to get it. So everything's just crowded. I don't know why I love it so much sometimes.
So we'll just switch gears to writing. Do you have an author community you turn to when you have questions, or when you have like in need of support? And any friends that you look to for advice?
I do. I always feel a little antisocial saying this, and I'm a pretty hardcore introvert anyway, so it makes sense that it carries over into my writing life. But I've actually never really been an active part of RWA, not because I don't think it's an amazing tool. That's Romance Writers of America. It's just for whatever reason, like I'm not like a group thinker, and I also don't really necessarily like to know what other authors are doing just because I don't want to be influenced by it. But that said, I do have my squad. So I don't know if you guys know like Jennifer Probst.
Oh, yeah.
Jennifer Probst, Rachel Van Dyken, and Jessica Lemon. Those are really my core three. And I talk to them every single day, if not hourly, via text or messages, honestly. And a lot of it's just like sometimes if a reader sends us a nasty email, sometimes it's just like talking each other through that. Or if one of us is stuck on a plot issue, or like, is, page 20 too soon for the first kiss, or is page 92 too late for the first kiss? It's all those sort of questions that you would probably imagine romance authors talking about. That's what we talk about. Oh, we talk about wine a lot too, honestly. Sometimes on a bad day, it'll be like 3:30 and we're like, is it too early? So there.
No.
I like your guys' style. But yeah, definitely couldn't do without them.
We noticed you have a lot of advice and resources on your website for authors. So can you tell us a little bit about what resources authors can find there?
Yes. So I've actually tried to step up a little bit this year. So as we're recording this, it's January 2019. And I can't even believe I'm saying this out loud because it's such a crazy goal, but I'm trying to put up a blog post every single day. And so far, I will say I've done it. I've had to batch some of them up a little bit. And I'm trying to do kind of themes. So if you're a writer and you're trying to figure out like what sort of stuff I post, on Wednesdays, I'll try to do writing craft. So sort of like, the actual process of writing and writing tips. Thursdays is sort of when I'll talk about like business stuff. So like tools that I use or strategies for publishing, all that kind of stuff. The business basically of being an author. And then like Saturdays I do design. Sundays are kind of all over the place. So yeah, it really sort of depends what day you look. And then also the business part, because so many of us don't really talk about that. And I think especially for newbies, as much as we can shed light for them, it's nice to help those people that are just starting out and hopefully not scare them off.
Is there any advice currently not on your website that you feel authors should know?
Honestly, not specifically, just because if I have a thought, I tend to put it out there. The one thing I will say, and it always sounds a little bit trite, and I'm sure people roll their eyes at me, but it's basically the best marketing strategy is really to write another book. So I get so many questions from people that have written one book or haven't even finished the book, and they're already worrying about how to promote it. And at least one thing that worked for me, and granted, this was a few years ago and times change, and I know the market has changed quite a bit, but the best way that I grew momentum was to just write another book. So I wrote it and I put it up and then I started the next one. And it really, I think, is, readers knowing that they can count on you to release something consistently. That's going to help them remember your name far more than any Facebook party or, Instagram strategy that you try. So it really is just keep going and don't focus on the one book, because so few of us are in the like E.L. James category or J.K. Rowling's. Like very few people are known for one book. And like my personal role model is Nora Roberts, who yeah, I mean she's been writing since before I was born, and I am not a spring chicken. And she didn't have one book that made her super famous. She just kept writing book after book, and people eventually realized they could count on her for a consistently good story.
Even from a reader's perspective, knowing that an author I just found that I really, really like has like 5 more books I can read is like the best find you could do.
The best.
Yes, exactly. I know I still, even being a reader or an author, I still get that way when I read, and it'll be some author I've never heard of and I think she's new and I find out she's not. And I'm like, oh my gosh, feels like a gold mine.
And then I blew through like an 8-book series. I'm like, oh, that was a great find.
Have that reading hangover for like the next couple of days.
Yes.
It's kind of depressing though, because then don't you think like you'll never find another one that was that good?
Oh yeah, all the time.
And I'm like, that was the end. I've peaked.
Do you read a lot of romance too, or do you kind of like to switch out to different genres?
I sometimes get embarrassed to say that I actually don't read romance. I should say I don't read contemporary romance that much anymore. And that's partially because I never want to inadvertently mess with my own voice or my own style or, accidentally pick up somebody else's idea or character quirk when reading. But it's also, I've noticed contemporary romance has changed quite a bit since I first started writing, and it tends to be a lot sexier now. And I'm like, I don't want the sexy stuff. I want like the butterflies. So part of it is just reading preference. Part of it is a little bit just I don't want to mess with my writing process. I do read a lot, and I mean a lot of Regency romance. I always have, but in particular, as I've pulled back from contemporary a little bit, I find I'm reading that more than ever. I feel like the Regency authors can't keep up with me. They need to write faster.
I've been finding that that's what I've been turning to a lot recently too. Like that's all I'm reading and I don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know what it is either. And like, I do still, like if I have friends that release a book, I'll obviously read their contemporary romance. I'll always buy Christina Lauren. I do have a couple auto-buy authors, but for some reason, the Regency stuff just is working for me lately. And then other genres, no. I do read nonfiction. And actually one of my goals for this year is to read more nonfiction because it is, along with romance, probably one of my favorites. It always kind of feels like the brain food, whether it's a self-improvement book. I read a lot of biographies, but like I've never really been into women's fiction. I don't really read mysteries. I will read YA occasionally, but only if I know it has a lot of romance in it. So yeah, I'm pretty much all about the romance.
And then just a offshoot is why do you personally like to write romance?
I don't know. I think about that and I'm like, I think I liked romance even before I hit puberty when I look back at it. Because, I was a super avid reader. So I think first grade, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. But I definitely distinctly remember it's sort of like this pivot point, and I don't know how old I was. I think probably way too young. But like I discovered Nancy Drew and the Sweet Valley Twins, like before they got to Sweet Valley High, whatever the younger ones are. And even there, they would have little romances. And like that was what I loved to read. And then by the time I got to 7th or 8th grade, I was fully reading the stuff because they have, YA romances even back then. And then by the time I got to high school and I discovered my first romance novel, it was honestly all over. I was like, they write entire books just about the romance part. And yeah, I was kind of done for. And throughout college, I totally would buy, this is before ebooks, I would buy 15, 20 used books on Amazon and have them shipped to my parents' house. So they were waiting when I got home from college. And I would just binge read them like crazy.
I love that. I did that too during university.
So what are you working on next? What can readers look forward to from you in 2019?
So I do have next up, and it's actually just a couple of weeks away as I'm speaking of doing promo, and I've done none. I have the last book in my 21 Wall Street series, which is an Amazon series. But then what I'm so excited for is a brand new series, and it's called Central Park Pact. And it's basically, I don't know, have you guys ever seen the movie The Other Women, or Other Woman, maybe, as Cameron Diaz?
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's not a great movie. The premise is they are all unknowingly married to or dating the same guy. So I decided to do that. And then bear with me here because it's not as dark as it sounds, but they actually meet at his funeral. So it has almost sort of a dark comedy.
Yeah.
And he has, kind of not a comedic death, but it's not a tragedy. But yeah, so they basically form this very unlikely friendship over this guy that kind of screwed them all over. So it's sort of, the three of them really is about their friendship. And then they make a pact to sort of protect each other from guys like Braden, the dead jerk. And then, of course, they find nice guys along the way and sort of help guide each other towards happily ever after. But it's fun because I'm not a huge fan. I'm just going to say this and hopefully not insult any other authors that are listening. I'm not a huge fan of the romance genre going towards the shirtless guy cover for every single contemporary romance. So one thing that was really fun for me about this is it's a trade paperback series with a different publisher for me. And they let me do something that does look a little bit more like women's fiction. So it's got kind of a cute little cartoon and so it's fun to do something that was basically it felt a little bit closer to my branding. And so yeah, I'm so excited for this series. I can't wait. And that'll be out in May, September, and then the third one that I'm writing right now will be out in January of 2020.
So 3 books.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll have to keep an eye out for them.
I've also never picked up a book because I was like, that shirtless chest is exactly what I need right now. Just throwing that out there.
I know. Well, the thing that I'm also a little bit baffled on, and I'm sure it's going to change eventually, but I'm like, how do the readers keep them all apart? Because I know I certainly can't when it's naked guy, oily six pack. So I guess they must have some system, but
I guess my Goodreads list of books I've read is how I distinguish between chests at this point. So then we just have one more question is, what have you been loving lately? It can be a book, a movie, TV show, podcast, whatever.
I don't actually watch a ton of TV. I don't read that much. I basically just work because I love it so much. But I will say one of my favorite things to do is when we were talking about graphics, so like all the Pinterest and Instagram stuff that I do try to do like at least 10 Pinterest graphics a day. And I have an Instagram post every day in my stories, which takes some time. So my favorite thing to do is at the end of the day, put on reruns of stuff I've already seen. Like if you ask if I've seen some cool new show, there's zero chance that I've seen it, but I've seen Friends probably 10 million times. New Girl is favorite. My husband and I are actually super nerdy, and we watch all the Star Treks together. So he's already seen them because he was nerdy before me. But now, like, I'm basically learning the whole Star Trek world. So we'll put on Star Trek. That's from, I don't know, like 1,000 years ago. And we have our laptops and we work on graphics for a Pinterest account, and that's what we do. So there you have it. I watch stuff that's 10 years old or older.
I mean, I picked movies that I've seen before, probably more so than I should.
I've also probably watched Friends like 10 times.
It's just so comforting. And I think that's probably why I gravitate towards it. Like I've never really, in the same way I like to read romance and I don't necessarily like thrillers and stuff I know has a sad ending. I'm the same way with movies and TV shows. So if I am going to try something new, I will absolutely Google it. And I'll be like, does anyone die? Should I be prepared for like somebody to get divorced? Like I just like to be mentally prepared, basically.
Yeah. And then so our final question is, where can readers find you online?
Well, if you've been listening to me babble, you probably already know that I love Instagram. So Instagram is really kind of the go-to. I am on Pinterest, although Pinterest I don't recommend so much for updates. And then that newsletter that you mentioned, it has been through 10 million iterations. I'm always trying to find quick outside about that. I find it very interesting that there are all these best practices about newsletters. And I've taken classes, I've read books, I've done like online courses, that whole thing. And interestingly, romance readers, I guess, don't seem to follow the same patterns as supposedly other like businesses do. Like that's why you see me change so much, is because they're like, oh, this is a new big thing and this will get you a better open rate. And I'm like, nope, readers didn't like that one. So that's why I am always trying to explore a little bit on my newsletter. So if you sign up for my newsletter, it will probably change in strategy about 10,000 times, but I have fun with it.
I noticed, as I interrupt this, that once you sent like a newsletter survey or something, and I thought that was the best idea I've ever seen, just to be like, what books do you like? Why are you looking at my emails all the time? Like I thought that, and I feel more authors could try that and maybe have more success. Did you find that was helpful or?
It sort of was, except it's confirmed what I was afraid of, is that different people want different things.
Yeah.
So I was almost sort of hoping, like, it would be helpful to know if everybody just wanted the book updates, then I'd be like, well, Lauren, shut up about your life and your dog and your blog posts. They just want book news. But that's not the case, because that is the majority of people obviously want to know when I have a new book out. But then there's also a whole group that follow me because I'm a writer. So I'm trying to figure out basically how much does it make sense to segment, which is the email marketing term, which is send certain emails to certain people. But really the tricky part, I'm getting really into this now, feel free to cut this part. But the tricky thing is because we authors don't sell our stuff directly, we don't really have a way of knowing who buys which book. So a lot of people will sell stuff through their website and then they can say, oh, we already know that this person bought the first stiletto book, so we'll send them, an update on book 2. Whereas I don't have that information because I don't know who's bought what. So I always feel like I'm bombarding people and it gets very complicated.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to assume, like in my head, I'm thinking like, oh, everybody's read every book and I don't want to keep talking to them about this. But obviously there's a ton of people that haven't read all 30 of my books. I just don't know who those people are yet. Trying.
Do you use that like a newsletter client to send out your newsletter? Like we use MailChimp for ours. Is there one you use or is it just
I do. And that's actually part of the reason that you've probably seen it change so much. So I used MailChimp for a long time. And then in the past year, I've switched. I've tried maybe 3 others. And I have finally decided on ActiveCampaign, which is sort of one of the bigger ones. And I like it just because it'll tell you exactly what people clicked on. And then it'll like tag those people for you. So if I know, like it'll start to tell you, hey, this person always clicks on a stiletto book. And it's smart enough to pick that up without you having to analyze the data. And then similarly, it'll tell you like, this type of blog post is the most popular, or this person only opens your emails at night. So maybe send this person in the night schedule, all that kind of stuff that I'm not quite sure what to do with yet, but it's nice that it's starting to gather that for me so I can hopefully someday crack the newsletter code.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is, and then I'll stop, I promise. But
Keep going. We love it.
Well, when I mentioned that romance authors or romance readers tend to function differently than what I've been hearing from sort of other areas and other businesses, is overwhelmingly the studies show that newsletters that are text only, so that read like a letter where it's like dear so-and-so, hi, this is Lauren Layne. And if it's just text with the links in there, those supposedly have much higher open rates, like by 25 to 30% usually, and they have higher click-through rates. Whereas I've been trying that for 3 weeks now, and that has not been the case for me. People much more preferred when I did, because I used to do prettier ones where I would have graphics. I did the clutch for a long time, and even though all the studies show like that's not what people want, they don't want the images, they want a personal letter from you, that doesn't seem to be the case for my followers. So that's why you're seeing me change too. I'm trying to basically collect this data and be like, okay, what are people liking? What are they opening? Yeah, and it's a mystery. Any preferences?
I mean, I guess I'm gotten used to images, so that's what I expect. But do I prefer that? I'm not sure. I do like them though. But I also like Pinterest and Instagram. So I guess it's what I enjoy using anyways.
Yeah, that's very true.
It's a mystery. I gotta keep trying.
Yeah, I'll keep you guys updated. This one had my highest open rate.
Yes, let us know. Oh, great. So that's all our questions we have. Yeah, so thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I think we've learned a lot.
Awesome. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you so much for listening to Lauren's interview. I really encourage you guys to check out her Instagram and Pinterest. So we'll have links to those social media platforms from her on our blog.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. And you can check out Kobo Writing Life on social media as well. You can find us on Facebook at Kobo Writing Life, on Instagram at kobo.writing.life, and on Twitter at Kobo Writing Life.
I'm glad to hear it because I never remember any of those. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time.
Hey, don't stop listening yet. We've got bonus content in this episode.
So keep listening for a preview of Lauren Layne's title, Hot Asset, the first book in her 21 Wall Street series, which has been graciously provided to us by Blackstone Publishing.
Thanks, Blackstone. And if you haven't checked it out yet, you can grab this audiobook for free with a Kobo audiobook free trial. That's kind of exciting if you haven't had a chance to check out the Kobo audio experience yet. We all love it. I love it, at least.
So take a listen. Tell us what you think.
Right now.
Do it now.
Goodbye.
Week 1, Tuesday afternoon. I'm pulling my stapler out of my box of office crap when there's a knock at the conference room door. I glance up, lifting my eyes in surprise when I see the last person I'd expect leaning against the doorway. Ian Bradley's dressed impeccably in a light gray suit, black tie, and holding 2 frothy concoctions. I click my stapler twice and study him, trying to figure out his game. His expression's friendly, but his blue eyes are calculating. Mr. Bradley, Ms. Mackenzie. He doesn't move. Would you like to come in? He grins. Would you like to put that stapler down? The moment I do, he steps forward and, setting one of the drinks on the table, slides it toward me with a flick of the wrist. If anyone else did this, the drink would tip and fall, but Ian simply makes the cup slide perfectly across the table and into my waiting hand. I lift the Starbucks cup and study it. Really? Bribery? Barista made 2 by accident. I could just give it to Kate. Ah, yes, your assistant, I say, leaping on the opening. I'd met Kate Henley yesterday, and my initial impression of the tiny brunette was that she has one of the best poker faces I've ever seen. Verdict after trying to coax her into conversation today? The best poker face I've ever seen. She said she's worked for you for 5 years, I say. He walks toward the window, looks down. They gave you the shitty conference room. The other ones have a better view. I'm not here for the view. No, you're here because of JCon, he says, turning back around. It's a predictable play, fishing for information. Granted, he's right. I'm here for JCon, and I'm not all that surprised Wolf's already put that at the top of their guesses. But this isn't my first rodeo.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we provide insights and stories from leaders and experimenters in the world of self-publishing.
If you want even more information about growing your Kobo sales, check out our blog or find us on social.
And if you're just finding us and ready to start your self-publishing journey today, sign up for free at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!